To publish her work, Invisible Walls, which was originally published in Malayalam. And we're very happy to have her with us today to discuss her writing, translation, and a whole host of other issues. Ma'am, if I may begin with the first question.
Yes.
Your book Invisible Walls was originally published in Malayalam as Aparna Yude Tadavarakal. You have translated the book yourself as Invisible Walls in English. What made you undertake this translation, and did you face any challenges while translating it?
Well, Aparnayude Tadavaragal, the Malayalam original, I started writing it as short fiction, portraying two women as ego and alter ego. But the characters refused to be confined to the limited space of a story, and soon it developed into a novel. The novel was well received in Kerala, but only by the intelligent reader sect, as the common readers were put off by the experiments in narratology. It was shortlisted for the Central Sahitya Academy Award, Kerala Sahitya Academy Award for long fiction. In the Malayalam original, the two girls were Aparna and Ashwati. That created the confusion. Aparna, Ashwati, they sound almost the same, somewhat alike. Since their lives were also running parallel to each other, the names were confusing to many readers. I still think it would have got greater readership had the names not resembled each other. Hence, in the English translation, I changed Ashwati into Kamala, quite distinct from each other. Okay. Now, what prompted me to translate it into English? Difficult question. Well, in one of the academic circles where the novel was discussed, a professor suggested that this novel would get more attention if it were translated into English. That sort of inspired me to take up the challenge. But in translation, you were asking about the challenges. The main challenge I had to face was to make the story clear to the target reader. Especially the second part, which portrays the intercurrents in the familial relationships in Kerala, especially the traditional patriarchy. The first part was okay as it was taking place in New Delhi, but I had to make slight deviations to make the Kerala side clearer because it was quite different. Different in the sense, in as we reach the south of India, the customs become narrower, and we become rather rigid in our conventions. So that's why I had to make the. That was the greatest challenge I had to face. But I made some deviation from the original in the translation in the second part of the novel. That's one of the privileges when the author becomes the translator also. And that was the only way to make itself clear to the readers. Some of the reviews have made it very clear that both the parts are well integrated and they understand it perfectly well. But in Kerala, there was so much confusion about it.
No, that's very interesting that, one of the challenges in translation is how to translate the cultural context of the book itself.
Yes.
And it's interesting that you say we become more rigid as we go to the south, because one would have thought literacy standards are higher, education is higher. But do you feel that's not the case?
Maybe I should have found a better word than rigid. But I feel, that we in the South are somewhat more conventional because the European culture was faster to reach North India. It was slow in coming down, filtering down to the South. Maybe that's why. But now, things are changed. Women are more educated. Feminism has come into vogue, and naturally, the conventions are also stepping back.
True. Very interesting to hear about the challenges you faced while translating the book, and also interesting that a book is a work in progress. The original that you said caused some confusion to the readers, and then you yourself chose to make these changes while bringing out the English version. So a book once published, the story doesn't end there. The story of the book continues as you modify it further for a wider audience. Um, you are both a writer and a translator. Which of these roles or activities do you prefer or find more creatively satisfying?
Writer, translator, the duo. Okay, definitely it's the writer's role that is more creatively satisfying
Right.
because since both of us are women, I don't know who the listeners are, but let me use a feminine imagery. Writing something original is like delivering a beautiful baby.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
translating it is like taking the baby to a party for introducing it.
Okay.
So
Lovely
that
metaphor. Yeah.
yes. The one is quite natural, the other is sort of laborious. You sort of choose to translate it, and you work upon it, and you change sometimes, you deviate, you digress, you
Yes.
take all the liberties.
Yes.
So I would like to say that the translator's role also can enjoy creative freedom
Of
when,
course.
as I said earlier, one is one's own translator.
Yes.
Then you can take exorbitant freedom because it's your own work and nobody is going to question you. Okay.
True.
I have translated into English several works, several short stories, I should say, from Lalitambika Andajanam, C.V. Sriraman, T. Padmanabhan, and even youngsters like E.K. Shahina. But I have to be extremely careful when I do the translation, not allowing it to slip into too much of transcreation, because I have to be aware of the limits of the freedom I could take. I
True.
like to do it in consultation with the author if the author is alive.
Yes.
With Laditambika Andarjanam, I had no problem because she couldn't protest anyway. But with
Yeah.
others, T. Padmanabhan and all, and I'll give you another example with C.V. Sriraman. He's also no more. But when I did his story, Irikapindam, he wanted me to do it. Okay. And I translated the title Irikapindam as obsequies for the living.
Okay.
Obsequies for the living. That is, rites, funeral rites for a person
Yes.
who is
Yeah.
alive. So
Yes.
Irikapindam is a Sanskrit or Sanskritized Malayalam term for that. So I thought this would make it clear to the readers. But then he felt that the original Malayalam title has to be retained. He said, let the readers know it.
Huh.
Let the readers learn a new word. But then,
Okay.
if you want to look up a new word, you have so many other ways of doing it, no other than reading a
Yeah.
translation.
True.
So it needed a lot of discussions with him to convince him that this would be the better, and finally he relented. And I knew that I shouldn't take so much freedom without consulting the author. So the author felt that the Malayalam title should be retained because, as he told me, cultural transference is one of the aims of translation,
Yes.
which is true. Which is true. But then a story with the title Irikapindam may put the target reader off. That's what I
Right.
felt. I felt it should be simple and it should convey what the story is going to tell them. Hence, I translated it and I was able to convince him, but I was careful with the later translations. But in my own translations, I could do as I liked, and nobody was the question.
Yes.
So, when the translator is dealing with other writers, translation cannot be creatively satisfying,
True.
or rather I should say, when the translator translates his or her own work, then of course it can be creatively satisfying. But even then, I would like to stick to the earlier thing I told you, that writing something original is like delivering your baby, and translating it into a foreign language means you are introducing the baby to a public circle.
Right.
Hope you like
um,
it.
and do you find that your translations have helped introduce your work to a wider audience? You would have received feedback from readers who have read your work in translation and perhaps communicated with you thereafter?
Yes. The feedback I usually get is rather, I haven't got any negative feedback so far. Some of my translations, the stories, my own stories, are being taught in universities.
Right.
And the thing is, they never let you know. They never let you know that their syllabus has absorbed your translation of your
Okay.
own story. But then the students write. The
Okay.
students bother to find out the author or author translator, I should say, and they write their impressions and they ask more
Wonderful.
questions about the characters, etc. And
Mhm.
then only oh, my story is being taught in Pune, Bombay, Delhi, etc. So, like that, the feedback I get is very interesting, and that sort of prompt me, guides me on.
Mhm. Wonderful. It's so good to get feedback from your readers and positive feedback at that. I'm sure as a writer, it continues to inspire you to keep writing. Um, what do you feel is the role of the translator in today's times when people, communities seem to be, less able to get along with each other?
Yes, the world is becoming a global village, and we need more translations to get to know the fellow authors. For a country like India, especially, which is multilingual, this is more important because I'm rather ashamed to tell you that we know Marquis, we know Derrida, we know Kundera, we know Italo Calvino, and many writers, European and American, as
Hmm.
their works come to us.
Hmm.
Sometimes in original English, sometimes in translation. Okay,
Yes,
but we don't know the Indian authors.
very
We
true.
don't know the Indian authors who write in their own regional language
Yes.
because translation fails there, or rather, they don't choose to translate their works or they don't get publishers. We don't know. In fact, I came to know of Krishna Sopti much later, much late when I was attending a seminar in Delhi. Somebody
Hmm.
mentioned Krishna Sopti as the greatest feminist writer, and
Hmm.
I felt ashamed that I have never even heard of her.
Hmm.
Then again, Olga, other such writers, they took a
Yes,
long time to come down to the south. Come down
true.
to Olga is a South Indian author, yet
Yes.
her
Huh.
translations had took a long time in coming down to us, coming
Right.
down to our reading table. They were
Hmm.
not available in translation. So we
Yes.
Indians realized only too late the importance of getting ours translated. The
True.
translated works from other Indian languages help us know that regional literature is far more varied than Indian English literature. Here, Salman Rushdie had said that in his introduction to vintage writing
Hmm.
that Indian literature written in English is far more superior to regional writing because he has not read regional writing.
Yeah.
They were
True.
not available to him in English translation.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
this fact can be brought to light or highlighted only by translation. Now I think Sahitya Academy, NBT, and several important publishers like Niyogi, you have taken an active interest in bringing global attention to our literature. So a translation is very important, highly needed in our times to get
True.
to know our fellow writers.
Yes. Very true. Um, your novel, Invisible Walls, has a very interesting story within a story format, or a parallel narrative structure. Why did you think of writing the novel in this way?
Well, I believe that each story finds its own narratology. Since Aparna and Kamala were interrelated psychologically, the parallel framework had to be conceived. Even as parallels, it would have been too simplistic if I wrote it as independent pieces with a tangential connection. So
Hmm.
more interweaving had to be done to make each one stand distinct yet interconnected. So
Right.
I thought it would be better to make one the reader of the other story.
Yes,
That
that's true.
resulted in the story within the story.
Yeah.
But we should know that the technique of story within the story is
Huh.
not something new. Even writers like William Shakespeare have used it. So it's
Of course.
not something postmodern. But
Huh.
then, we need it in postmodern times to bring out the point
Yes.
that we want to stress.
True.
Then when I made that story within the story framework for my novel,
Huh.
suddenly my mischievous self imposed itself. okay, as the writer of the novel that Kamala was reading.
Hmm.
Chandrika Balan, Invisible
Yes.
novel by Chandrika Balan. So
Hmm.
I peeped in through my own work, and that's
Yes.
how the novel came about. Okay. So
True.
I had worked on it laboriously. It was the third draft that was sent for publication in Malayalam, and I think in English translation it was the third or fourth draft. You know, we discussed
Okay.
it, and you were a hard editor, very hard to please,
Oh,
and
wow.
I had to do so much, so many revisions, etc. And finally, it has come into this form. So I still believe that every story is born with a technique of its own, a narratology of its own.
Wonderful. Yeah. And I think you just illustrated how much hard work goes into, the craft of writing. So the end result may seem effortless to the reader. It may read very smoothly, but there is so much that happens behind the scenes as the writer toils over multiple drafts to create that apparently effortless final reading. So it's a very
Mhm.
valuable insight you've given us there. Um, the novel also explores the role of society in restricting the space for women to live as they choose, particularly through the depiction of the character of Aparna. Why do you feel society, or patriarchal society in particular, is so threatened by women's agency or the search for greater freedom?
Patriarchal society, especially in India,
Hmm.
is strongly built upon a system of beliefs.
Hmm.
The most dangerous belief is that a free woman is
Hmm.
really hazardous. Free woman is dangerous.
Hmm.
The woman is created to be the helpmate of man. She has only an auxiliary role to play, whether in family or in her job circle.
Hmm.
Even if she shares the economic duties of the husband in the family by bringing home salary, she is held in an inferior position.
True.
Most of the jobs that she was allowed to have were extensions of her household work, like teaching, nursing, etc.
Hmm.
But now I must say things have changed. As I said earlier, feminism has come into being, and it has given women a lot of freedom. But
Yes.
in patriarchal system, men enjoy the power, the
Yes.
dominance, the
Hmm.
hegemony, and it's an unjust social system, I should say. Every
Very
woman
true.
may be saying that even when they willingly subserve to it, they know that it's not doing them good. It is an unjust social system, and it never contributes to gender equality.
No.
I was just exploring the idea of a woman who hold personal space as important, coming to clashes with patriarchal society. Aparna, being educated in the north, comes down to, if you don't mind using the earlier adjective, rigid, rigid patriarchal setup of Kerala.
Okay.
She gets married to a poet, a very ambitious poet, who believes that the wife has to be obedient and subservient. The wife is inferior. And she is denied her personal space even though she is allowed to go to work.
Hmm.
She goes to work as a media person, and
Hmm.
media persons, women in the media, they need a lot of free time, and they need a lot of time. They may have to find somebody else to discharge their household work because
True.
their timing is rather
Yes.
it's not rigid again, if you don't mind the word.
Yeah.
So, but this man, he believes that she can go for work, but then she has to remain subservient. So her personal space is denied. This is quite damaging for a woman who values her selfhood. Kamala and her friends who had lived in Delhi, they apparently enjoyed a lot of personal freedom. And at that time, they were luckier comparatively. But
Hmm.
this was upset by their husband's intention to dominate the woman. And actually, the man forces her into marriage because marriage is domination, domination by the male sex. So, even in a free society, the dominant danger lingers. A woman who wants to nurture her selfhood, who wants a space of her own, is a threat to the inherent values of patriarchal hegemony. That's why they give you a longer rope.
Hmm.
You think you are free, but actually it's only a longer rope that you are given. So they create obstacles for the woman to go forward in her career, and often they do it in very subtle, cunning ways.
Hmm.
Even pregnancy becomes a tool to hold the woman in place.
Oh, yes.
So, it's like confining the woman by force to the limited space of being a wife and mother. Her selfhood is not needed by the patriarchal society. So the patriarchal society becomes alerted when the woman takes too much freedom. And it's only natural, I feel, for them to get upset. But I had been an English professor for 31 years, and I find my students enjoying more freedom in their marriages than I could even imagine myself to be taking. So they are the newer generation. They have found their own subtle ways of to
Hmm.
getting things done, and they make marriage a sort of mutual contract
Yes.
where certain conditions are put forth and both obey these conditions. One is sharing the household work. So
Yes.
that's really good. That's really good. That's something that patriarchy could never even imagine. Just
Yes.
imagine the reaction of the mother-in-law when she knows that her son has been washing the toilet. So it will be very disastrous for her age, for her patriarchal setup in which she was brought up. So
Yes.
that's why they try to prevent the woman from going too far, even if the long rope is given. So the auxiliary status that they impose on the woman confines her to a limited space. And that's why patriarchy is really scared of the woman who thinks independently. That's what I feel.
No, it's a very insightful thought, and I think very well analyzed. And it is heartening to know that things are changing, and that young women now have more space to, negotiate a more equal arrangement even within marriage. It's very heartening to know. Um, the novel has a protagonist, Kamala, who, along with her group of four friends, live a life of free choice in their personal lives. And this is quite a radical idea. Uh, would you wish to shed some more light on how you think this might offer an alternative to what is considered normal in society?
Yes, it's a radical idea. It's called polyamory.
Yeah,
Okay, polyamory, Polyamory.
yeah,
It's the practice of having intimate relationships with more than one partner, with the consent of all partners involved.
yeah.
So this is comparatively a new setup, and such open relationships are increasing, especially among the educated, free-thinking youngsters. It is their way of searching for a uh, for a for a non-monogamous relationship.
Right.
Now, Kamala and her three friends value personal freedom. They value their personal space, and they do not want to confine themselves to the norms of society.
Hmm.
Whereas, in the case of Aparna and her friends,
Hmm.
they were also in Delhi, but in
Hmm.
the case of Aparna and her friends, there was what can I say, a sort of a clear marked moral line. Yes, they had moral lines
Hmm.
to separate them. Aparna and her friend. They were um, two couples, and Aparna was alone. Alone. She did not have a partner.
Hmm.
So they had very strict moral lines to separate them. It was not a sort of independent relationship. But Kamala's friends, they challenged the foundational construct of society that the monogamous marriage is the only way to have a fulfilling long term relationship.
Hmm.
It is not. Polyamorous people focus on what love is, not what love is supposed to be in societal norms.
Hmm.
But the tragedy is when one of them tries to slip back into the norms by trying to dominate a woman in the patriarchal way. Kamala's friends, they had a sort of moral code of their own that
Hmm.
nobody would ask who slept with who.
Hmm.
But then one of them starts loving a woman, and Kamala, and he wants to marry Kamala, or rather, he wants to make her his own, which is a violation of the contract, the unsigned contract they have taken. So that is when the man's ego comes out, the inherent patriarchy in him comes out when he wants to dominate the woman, wants to limit a personal space. This is what I wanted to tell in that radical relationship, but I really don't know whether I have succeeded, because here most of the attacks were for those that type of free relationship. It is not happening in India. It may be happening in Europe or America, but not in India, some critics said. But no, it happens in India also, because I know some of them. I know some of them.
Um, what are some topics or themes you would like to explore and write on in future?
Just now I mentioned polyamory. I'm actually considering polyamory to be the theme of a later work, not immediate one, not the immediate one, because just now I'm doing the backdrop reading for a novel with a Russian background. And that novel would be the deconstruction of a Russian writer of legendary status by projecting the story of his wife.
Okay.
Usually, writers are celebrated, but writers' wives are neglected.
Oh,
Often,
very
the writers exploit their wives, but the
often,
story is
yes.
not brought to the front. Especially when writers become legends,
Huh.
and they are sort of literally worshipped in the country.
Yeah.
Even if the wife brings a charge against them, she is just kicked to the background. So
True.
I'm just trying to. I'm sorry, I cannot reveal more than
No,
that
no, of course
now.
not. Huh.
So
Yeah.
I haven't started it actually. I'm just reading up the Russian background and more about this writer and his relationship with the wife. So after that, if time permits, I may consider writing a novel on polyamory.
Sounds fascinating. Um, on a more personal note, ma'am, uh, you are a cancer survivor, and you have mentioned this in Invisible Walls as well when you make an appearance as a writer. So, could you share a bit about your fight against the disease and how you found the strength to overcome it?
Cancer
Mhm.
visited me twice with a
Okay,
break of 5 years in between. It
okay,
was nasal cancer I got.
okay.
Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma was the medical term.
Right.
And
Yeah.
nasal cancer, this type of lymphoma, comes upon men who are addicted to smoking.
Okay.
I don't smoke. Nobody in my family smokes, so I'm not even a passive smoker.
Right.
Hence, the causative agent is unknown, so it
Okay.
might be environmental pollution. It
Okay.
might be environmental pollution. That was the conclusion the doctors reached. But I used to tell them, when somebody who does not know me
Huh.
knows about my cancer, they ask, "Oh, cancer, breast, uterus," and I
Okay.
tell them, "Do you think a
Automatically.
woman can get cancer only on her feminine parts?"
Hmm.
No, I got it on my nose. I used to say very proudly, because
Okay.
that way it's a sort of gender equality. So
Okay.
the treatment, you can look at it with a joke. The treatment comprised surgery, 6 cycles of chemotherapy, and 26 radiation. It was, I should say, pain and suffering all through. I broke down initially, especially when I lost all my hair and I
Right.
became bald, shining bald head. But soon I found that the best that I could do under the situation was to accept it and coming to terms with it.
Huh.
So I started counting my blessings. What are my blessings? I have cancer, but what are my blessings? A loving family that walked on the burning cinders with me. I know so many cancer patients who have complained to me that their spouses left them as they knew that they had cancer. Many had cried on my lap. I'm not exaggerating. Okay, so I had a loving family that held me close, so that my pain can be lessened. Then my students and my readers, their love and prayers. Many people used to come and see me. And sometimes on the days when my blood count is low, visitors were not allowed. And then they used to leave their gifts with my husband. And I got a lot of pens. They wanted me to write, so they used to give me with pens. Some of them brought these prasadams from the temples. They used to do some sort of worship
Okay.
for me, and then they bring the puja prasadams, etc. So all these were rather encouraging for me to go ahead and ignore the disease. Then another blessing was I was at the hands of the best oncologist in Kerala, Dr. V.P. Gangadharan, very renowned oncologists, and that sort of cheered me up. And I got a lot of information. I started reading up on cancer. Lot of information I got on cancer, and read some articles, online articles, books, etc. And gradually, I came out of the fear and tear, and retrieved my sense of humor also. I started
Wonderful.
laughing at cancer. I laughed at
Amazing.
my bald head. I laughed at cancer. I made all the visitors who came to me sad. It's very fun watching them. When they enter the gate, they become very sad. They don't want to actually step in. So they ask, is she all right? Can we see her? So many inhibitions they have. And when they come in, they won't look at my face. They look up, they look down. And sometimes I too look up to see if there were cobwebs up. So they wouldn't look at my face because it was embarrassing to see me as a bald person. So I used to teach them. Used to teach them. Don't I look beautiful now? More beautiful than when I used to come to college. And
How
finally, when they
lovely.
leave the house, they would be smiling. They would be
Wonderful.
smiling.
Wonderful.
Yes, but that's the only way in which you can win the battle. Otherwise,
Yes.
you cry and you become depressed, and finally, when the cancer leaves you, you'll become a heart patient, or you will have so many other personal problems. So, laughing it off,
Is
that's the
very
best
essential.
idea.
Yeah.
Yes,
Best
and
medicine.
the terminal disease. And with the strength of mind and determination, I won to twice. And it was my doctor who asked me to write the autobiography, write your experiences so that you will be inspiring a lot of people to fight and
Yes.
defeat the illness. So I must say that my family, humor, my sense of humor, and also my doctor, good medication, and my belief in God. I believe in God. I believe in prayers, etc. And the book I wrote on my cancer experiences,
Yes.
titled in Malayalam as Nyandugalude Nattil Oridavela, an interval in the land of crabs, had been praised for its humor, because they say usually when we read autobiographies, we
Yes.
are put off because of the misery in it. Here you
Yes.
have given a realistic portrayal, but your sense of humor. Even doctors have called it a handbook on cancer with the anecdotes of humor. So that is really,
Wonderful.
yeah, yeah.
You've just mentioned your autobiographical account of your struggle with cancer, Yendugalude Natil Oru Idavela, which
Idavela.
has also been made into a successful Malayalam movie, I believe. There is a film based upon it. So, how was your experience of seeing your work translated for the big screen?
That's also a sort of translation, right?
It is.
Earlier, first, my story website has been made into had been translated into the big screen by Lenin Rajendran, with the title Ratri Maya, or Rain in the Night, and he got several awards for that. But this
Right.
was a blockbuster movie made by Nivin Poli, our young, promising film star, established film star, I should say. And Nivin Poli was a young actor. He excelled himself in prankster roles. And this was a change for him. I thought it would be a change for him. The director was Altaf Salim. And when they wanted to make a film out of it, I had my own doubts. So they came to discuss. And we talked of the source language readers and the target viewers in
Right.
the movie translation. Movie is, I know, totally different from a book. And I could understand the need of them to change the story to suit the ambience. But I insisted only on two conditions. One, it should be a college professor who gets cancer.
Okay.
Two, she should come out of it as a survivor, because
Okay.
only then can the message of hope be conveyed.
Right.
And, as long as these two conditions were fulfilled, I did not mind. The cancer patient's son, played by Nivin Kohli, playing his pranks again, falling in love while the mother is being given chemotherapy. No, that's part of his image, and I didn't mind that because the message, powerful message, was given by that blockbuster movie. It's a beautiful experience to watch the tragic scenes of my life as tragic comedy on the screen.
Straight.
Thank you for mentioning it as a translation. Yes.
uh, Bob, I'm sure you inspired so many people, through particularly this book and its translation as a movie. The world is facing a pandemic situation at this time, a severe medical and human crisis. Some authors have found this period of enforced isolation productive for writing. Others are facing writer's block. How have you dealt with the present situation? And are you hopeful for the future?
The pandemic situation has been difficult for me, just as it is difficult for others. But there were many who could write as if nothing has happened. They were finding this enforced isolation rather productive. And they were asking me also to be productive. Why don't you write? Write that novels. Write all those novels. Write all those stories. Write all those articles. But I couldn't even take up my pen. That was the initial reaction because no news was good. People were just dying. And how can you relax when so much mortality happens around you? I had a terrible block, as you said. The writer's block was heavy on me. It lay heavy on me. And many of my writer friends, established writer friends, also had it. We used to discuss it on the phone. Somehow we couldn't write. This enforced isolation was hard to bear. If you open the TV, you see only very bad things, and all the information you get not encouraging. Any minute, the enemy will be upon you. And I felt that cancer was really tolerable because this is too much. A miserable death, a very miserable, lonely death without seeing anyone because nobody wants to see you. And even your body will not be brought back home, no obsequies. So it was
Yeah.
really terrifying to me. But then again, as in the case of cancer, I thought, what's the point? What's the point of being depressed? What's the point of being inactive?
True.
If we are isolated in a room, let's make the best of it.
Right.
So I started reading. So much
Wonderful.
backdrop reading I had to do, so many old novels. I even read Woodhouse, Edgar Wallace. I went back to them because
Lovely.
I read them as a child, and now reading them again. Woodhouse, I burst into laughter on reading about
Yeah, yeah.
Jeeves, what is spring fever, etc. Spring fever, I still have it on my table. So that's sort of refreshing, and they made the trip, uh, the what the dangerous moments rather simpler. I could tolerate. I could live with them, but even then, it was difficult. I couldn't write. But then slowly things started changing. No more seminars, no more book launches,
Right.
no more travels, no more eating outs, no journeys.
No.
And then how did it all change? All the depressing situation. It changed because the seminars were replaced by webinars.
Yes.
So they used to invite me, please come and talk. Now we are doing that. Please come and let us meet. Let's just talk. We'll book a Zoom platform or some other platform and let us have that meeting there. So books were launched online. We used to meet, writers used to meet and discuss online. So everything has an alternative.
Yes.
So all the, don't think that the world is coming to an end because
Of course
in
not.
my beginning is my end, as T.S. Eliot has said.
True.
So every end is a beginning and every
Yes.
beginning is an end. So finally, when the atmosphere began to change like that, and when we started meeting friends on social media platforms, life became more interesting. And depression I felt was slowly leaving, and slowly I took up my pen. So after a long time of the pandemic, I could write only one single story, I should say. That was Ionija, meaning not born through the vagina. And that story, as soon as I finished it, Madhurabhumi called me for their Onam number. They wanted a story, and I sent it to them, and it is just published.
Oh,
And now
wonderful.
I get so many positive reactions and encouragement about that story. And that is filling me with inspiration to go back to my writing. As I told you, I am reading the backdrop reading for my novel that I'm going to write, but I have already finished the second story also. So now,
Wonderful.
even now, the pandemic is gaining strength, and people say
Hmm.
again triple lockdowns will be imposed. Oh,
Yes.
let that be, let that be. But then we will meet on platforms like this. We will
True.
exchange ideas and we will meet friends. And of course, no going out to eat, but then
Hmm.
food will be brought to your door. Only thing is, you have to be careful. So, like that, things are slowly turning back to as I shouldn't say as they were, but then, somewhat on milder terms, I should say. So this life has a way of adapting itself, and it will take us along if we are willing to go. And you asked me about future. Future, I think we have to hope against hope that there may be, because there'll be more viruses breeding. That is what we were told. So we have to just be hoping against hope. But as I said earlier, life has its own way of reorganizing and resurrecting. And if you just surrender unconditionally and try to overcome your depression in your own way, I think things will not hurt you so much.
It's very good advice, I think, for all your readers, for all our listeners here today, to sort of accept and adapt the situation, adapt oneself to the changing world we live in, and make the best of it and move on. Um, it's been wonderful talking to you, ma'am. You've been such an inspiration. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm sure all our viewers have enjoyed it too. So we look
Thank you,
forward.
Priyamada. In fact, I wanted to meet you as we were working together, and now we are meeting online. Soon, I hope, when the pandemic is over, I'll be able to see you.
I hope so too, definitely. And of course, we look forward to more of your writing and translation. And may let me wish you the very best for all your writing and reading and creative efforts in the future. Thank you so much for sparing the time to talk to us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyamada.